We're gathered here at St Ninian's Cathedral from the Diocese to reflect together and learn more about our response to the climate crisis and the crisis of our environment. And we're hearing from so many people with practical ideas and suggestions about all the issues to do with buildings and travel and other things that we are trying to address as we address this problem. It's important that we continue to gather, that we continue to work together, because this is not something that we can solve in an instant. We mustn't lose heart. We must continue to listen to all these wonderful suggestions that are coming and facilities and resources that are available to us. At heart, though, as Christians, we have to realize this is a spiritual issue for us, not just a practical one. We have to look into our own spirituality and hear what God is saying to us through the beauty of creation, but also through the crisis in creation, and to learn that we are fellow creatures with all other life on this planet and part of the earth that God has created and is creating around us all the time. We need to change our spirituality, not just our practice. And gatherings like this are all about that. I hope that we will continue to do this for many years to come and really make a difference. Loving God, creator of heaven and earth, this earth, our home, belongs to you. Give us grace to love it as you do. Give us courage to give ourselves as you do, for the good of all people and of all your creation. Strengthen us to stand as you do with the vulnerable poor, those nations and peoples directly affected by climate change now. Give us wisdom to know when we have enough, and the voice to say enough to all that harms creation and hurts the poorest of your people. May our day be a time of learning and challenge and understanding, and may it lead to action. All this we ask through your Son, whom you sent to be part of your creation and to show us the way to peace, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
This is a very welcome opportunity to share stories together, and as First Minister, but also as the local member of the Scottish Parliament for this area, for this very cathedral, it's an enormous privilege to be part of the conversation. And let me express my thanks to the Diocese for the leadership that it is expressing on these issues. When I became First Minister, one of the points that I felt I had to address was the fact that the government was aiming to do many things across many different areas of policy, and I felt I had to face up to the fact that the government had to narrow its policy agenda. So I set out 4 principal themes that would govern the government's programme: the eradication of child poverty, the expansion of the economy, the achievement of net zero, and the improvement of our public services, particularly our National Health Service. And I did that with 2 things in mind. Firstly, the point I've already made, to narrow the focus of the government's agenda, but secondly, to create essentially an indivisibility between those different policy themes, that if we were trying to eradicate child poverty, we had to recognise the fact that children are living today in fuel poverty in houses that are not equipped for the climate that we are dealing with. So therefore the agenda on net zero had a relevance and a significance if I wanted to achieve my objectives of eradicating child poverty. So I share that with you to make an important point, that although I was focusing or narrowing the government's policy agenda, I was not doing that at the expense of the necessity of climate action, because the necessity of climate action is all around us. The political climate has changed dramatically. So when the 2009 Climate Change Act was passed in the Scottish Parliament, it was passed unanimously. There was not a voice against it, acknowledging the necessity of stringent action to tackle the climate and recognising our contribution and our obligation to do so. If that legislation was to go to Parliament today, it would be heavily contested because there is not unanimity on these questions. Now, I don't say that to in any way be party politically pejorative. I've not mentioned any political parties, but I do know it would be contested. I mention it to essentially stress the importance of what you're all doing, because you are an important voice in Scottish society who must speak out on the importance of climate action so that it does not descend into where lots and lots of issues descend into, of partisan, tribal, contested sentiments. Because if we do that, we will not have the focus of action to enable us to do what we need to do to enable us to make progress on tackling the consequences of our own actions, which have resulted in there being this climate damage that we wrestle with. And of course, the government has obligations in this respect domestically, and we are taking forward at the present moment our draft climate change plan, which sets out the pathway to net zero by 2040, and that is currently being scrutinised and considered by Parliament. But it is being considered and scrutinised by Parliament in a contested way. It is not being scrutinised in a way of saying, yes, there is an absolute necessity to do this. It's been scrutinised in a way to essentially challenge by some voices whether this is in fact necessary at all. So I express that to appeal to the diocese and to the Episcopal Church in Scotland, and to welcome the leadership of the General Synod on developing a pathway to net zero by 2030, and to recognise the importance of us all playing a part in that activity. Thank you very much.
We're now going to hear a little bit about some of the work that's happening within our churches in this diocese. To give a little bit of background about some of the projects that our Net Zero team from the province has been supporting, I want to tell you about the strategic funding partnership that we're so thankful to have set up with the Benefact Trust. This partnership has enabled pilot and pioneer projects from across the province to have funding from the Benefact Trust and from the province. And the idea of these projects is to have some case studies that can be shared with other churches, both within the SEC, but also beyond that, to be case studies for other heritage organisations, community groups, other faith groups. And so there's been two types of projects. The pilot projects have had a smaller amount of funding, and the idea of those is to fund scoping works, perhaps surveys, heating audits, so that churches can come up with a really robust project plan. Some pilot projects have also been trialling new technologies, so perhaps trialling a new radiant chandelier in a certain area of the building to see how that works and see if they want to then roll that out for the whole space. Then the pioneer projects have had a larger amount of money awarded to them, and they're kind of ready to go retrofit projects that are, able to just then roll out, having the money provided to them from this strategic partnership. And so one of those pioneer projects here in the St Andrews, Dunkeld Dunblane diocese is St Finian's in Lochgelly. So those of you who don't know St Finian's Lochgelly, it really is an area of social and economic deprivation in Scotland. It's an area of huge need, an area that perhaps is lacking in hope, but there's a small faithful congregation at St Finian's who long to have a building that's warm, a building that's more welcoming, a building that can actually serve a community that is in need. And so that's the vision. Many of you will know Reverend Jerry. He's an incredibly inspirational man and is doing amazing work in Glenrothes at St Luke's. I mean, that church through the week is just absolutely buzzing with people who are really in need but rely on going to that building, receiving food, being part of the cafe, part of the community kitchen. And so the idea at St Finian's is to create a similar church that can, yes, be thriving on a Sunday, but also thriving through the week, serving the local community. But at the moment, as we're all feeling today, it's freezing in the church. It's not quite as big as this space, but it's still got a very high ceiling, it's drafty, it's a kind of typical chilly church building. So St Finian's have had lots of surveys done and have come up with a plan to put solar panels on their large south-facing roof. They're going to have battery storage and they're going to have air-to-air heat pumps. And the idea of that is to create a space that's warm, that's welcoming, but also is sustainable for the future. So it's going to be a net zero church. The church has received this strategic money from the Benefat Trust, which is fantastic. But as you can imagine, installation costs for these sorts of projects are quite astronomical. So they're also delighted to have received the CARES funding, which is great. So that will contribute a huge amount to the project. At this stage, it's a planned project that's pretty much ready to go. So I guess what I'm here to say is watch this space. It will be really exciting to see this project actually come to life, and what's next for that church. So I'm sure there'll be another opportunity for us to gather together and hear more from St Finian's.
The Diocesan Environment Group has been galvanising efforts to move the diocese overall towards carbon net zero. The group was set up in the early part of 2021, and we started by raising awareness to the climate crisis and really encouraging congregations to see the real need to encompass their efforts to reduce the negative impact on the environment as part of mission, as part of our loving our neighbour. We identified churches that had already started on that journey, but we also really understood that many congregations feel daunted by this agenda. It is difficult, but we wanted to encourage everybody. We have been sharing resources, having people together in events, and underlining the fact that whether it's a small action or a big thing, that everything matters. Yes, we want to raise ambition, but it's also reassuring that everything that we do is as co-creators in God's creation, and it's part of God's plan.
I'm Alan Werrity from St Andrews, and we've been on the net zero journey now for getting on for 15 plus years, although when we started, we perhaps weren't calling it quite that title. I've got 4 key takeaway messages for you. Have an ambitious, integrated strategic plan. Seek professional advice. Identify grant awarding bodies, and phase implementation. And I'm going to take each of those in turn. An ambitious, integrated strategic plan. As I just hinted a moment ago, we started on this about 15 years ago when we were replacing our old electricity lighting with, at that time, LEDs. And we got funding from the then Climate Challenge Fund. Since then, we have moved into thinking about heating, about our electricity tariffs, and about energy efficiency. And let me take each of those in turn. Our current approach in terms of heating is to migrate from our gas boiler and wet radiator system to a hybrid system where we are currently proposing radiant heating for the church building itself and air source heat pumps for the hall and ancillary rooms. In terms of electrical power generation, we have moved to a renewable energy tariff, so that is effectively net zero. And we installed about 5 years ago now solar panels on our church roof. Now this proved to be quite a challenge because we are a B-listed building in the centre of St Andrews, which is a conservation area. Fife Council initially was very discouraging. They turned us down flat 10 years ago, but we didn't give up, and we came back 5 years later, and we persuaded them that not only would they be very unobtrusive, which indeed they are, but also, of course, it would contribute towards net zero. And I think that was an important chink in the armour of local authorities who can be very resistant, or were at that time very resistant to changing the exterior of listed buildings. And we also installed at the same time battery storage so that we could store some of the electricity we're generating but not immediately using. But as many of us heard this morning in the workshop with the Church's National Trust, it's terribly important in terms of energy efficiency to have well-maintained fabric. We are also embarking on that, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. We have minimized energy loss by having an interior porch to reduce drafts, and we are, as I've just hinted, embarking on a very ambitious program of fabric repair. So an integrated strategic plan. Secondly, seek professional advice. I cannot tell you how incredibly helpful the provincial Net Zero team have been in all of this. They are a wonderful resource, which the SEC now has. If you have any questions about net zero or wider issues of fabric repair, do contact Bethany and her colleagues. They are an outstanding resource, and do consult the website, which is, again, a wealth of valuable information. That, I think, should be your first port of call. In terms of energy efficiency, Business Energy Scotland will provide a free survey of your property and will make recommendations in terms of the optimal energy sources that you could deploy there to reduce the carbon footprint of the building. They also have systems of loans and grants for which you may be eligible. Thirdly, consult with other churches, because other churches, in many cases, are already well established on this journey. For example, we are proposing to install heat pumps in our church hall, and I visited St Leonard's in Bonnyrigg and Fetterso Church up in Stonehaven, which have already installed heat pumps, and again got valuable help in terms of what works and what doesn't work. In terms of buildings like this, radiant heating is increasingly becoming a potential solution. And again, as already been mentioned, Old St Paul's in Edinburgh and St Mary's Cathedral has already installed radiant heating. So if you wish to see those actually in operation, there are 2 SEC churches where you can actually get hands-on help and advice. Thirdly, identify grant awarding bodies. I've already mentioned Business Energy Scotland. They provide grants and interest-free loans and advice on what the optimal solution to your heating problems might be. There is also the Scottish Government's Community and Renewable Energy Programme, CARES. At the moment, it is in abeyance, but we are hopeful that it will be resurrected again in the new financial year. It has been managed by Local Energy Scotland, and that has proved to be an invaluable source of funding for many heating projects. Up to 80% of the cost can be covered by CARES. And the feedback that we've had from people who have had funding from CARES has been incredibly positive. They are very helpful and very willing to support you as you explore options with them. I've already mentioned the provincial Net Zero website. Do drill into that, because it is an invaluable source of information. And in terms of grant awarding bodies, there is an enormous list of funds that you can approach for funding. At the moment, under the Listed Places of Worship grant scheme, you can reclaim 20% of your VAT recovery. But alas, that is coming to an end at the end of this financial year. This is a UK programme which the Westminster government has now discontinued, and they're replacing it with a new scheme where they will be effectively offering £230 million for that recovery for heritage buildings, which will include churches. But that scheme only applies to England. It doesn't apply at the moment to Scotland. So, First Minister, I'm inviting you to reflect on this issue. There will be, I imagine, Barnet consequentials from this 230 million, which will flow into the Scottish budget. And I hope that you'll bear in mind the needs of our churches not to have effectively a 20% additional cost imposed upon them for repairs as of the 1st of April this year. Finally, phase implementation. We started this journey, as I say, 15 years ago with LED lighting in the church. We then put solar panels on the roof and added battery storage, even though it was a listed building in a conservation area. Don't give up if the local authority initially is rather discouraging. We have double glazed our hall, and we've installed smart metering in our hall and church, funded by CARES. That was about 5 years ago. We've installed at our own expense an interior porch to reduce heat loss, and we are now introducing radiant heating in the church, and we have plans for an air source heat pump in the hall and auxiliary rooms. And so I come to the fact that we have benefited this year from being a pilot church. We are in the process of installing 2 Herschel Halo chandeliers, and Adam Broadbent is here today and can tell you all about Herschel's Halo chandeliers. We are going to install them at the back of the church. Effectively in the cathedral, it would be where the font is at the west end there. This means that we can then locally heat the church when we have small groups where we don't want to heat the whole building, we just want to heat parts of the building, and we think radiant heating is an ideal way of undertaking that. So we've been awarded £7,250 as a pilot church towards a total cost of over £21,000. And if we are satisfied that these radiant heaters work for heating our church, our plan would then be to extend it through the rest of the nave and into the chancel, subject to satisfactory performance and further grant aid. So can I go back to my initial comments? 4 key takeaway messages. Have an ambitious, integrated strategic plan. Seek professional advice. Identify grant awarding bodies, and phase the implementation. Thank you.
When the last tree is cut down, and the last fish eaten, and the last stream polluted, you will learn that you cannot eat money. Now you may ask, what has this got to do with the mission of the church? It comes, I believe, from the First Nations traditions in North America. But it has a lot to do with why we are here today, working towards net zero. We should all passionately believe that we must care for creation. And we need to help heal the destruction that humankind has wrought on our planet. Jesus tells us with the great commandment to love God and to love our neighbour as ourselves. To love God, we need to celebrate his creation and care for it. Protect all that is created. And to love our neighbour is an act of justice, care, and hope for all.
So, St Mary's Dunblane has been an eco-congregation for over 20 years. And in that time, we feel that we've accomplished a great deal. We've worked on improving the energy efficiency of our building, along with accessibility, which we think is equally important. We've made our burial ground and rectory gardens more welcoming for pollinators and other wildlife, as well as for human visitors. And we've integrated our concerns about climate change and its human cost into our weekly worship, as well as into the pattern of the church year. The services of the season of creation are now well established and well loved by all ages at St Mary's. And in the last 4 years, we've developed an annual festival, Dunblane EcoFest, in order to raise awareness of environmental issues in the wider community. And we're now experimenting with monthly events, an eco-cafe and a repair cafe, to keep the momentum going throughout the year. It sounds a lot, I know, but it's been achieved on a shoestring by a very small team of enthusiastic volunteers. And this is what I want to emphasize to you today. In my experience, it only needs just 2 or 3 folk who are passionate about enabling change to happen in the church and the local community, a vestry that's ready to listen to them, and a congregation holding them in prayer. In 2021, that group prepared an environmental action plan for vestry, using tools offered by Eco-Congregation and the province. I'd recommend this kind of exercise to any church who wants to measure how green they really are. It helped us to recognise that whilst we'd been doing a good job in raising awareness of environmental issues among our church members, we were doing very little really to share it, to share the knowledge that we'd learnt, that we'd achieved within the wider community. So we decided to organise an event which came to be called Dunblane EcoFest. The initial event in June 2022 comprised of a lively, well-attended question time on environmental issues with some well-known speakers. And then the main event on a Saturday in May involved more than 20 environmental organisations, local, regional and national, offering information and helpful guidance and support. Since then, in the last 3 years, the festival has grown from a day to a fortnight, engaging with scores of environmental organisations and hundreds of local people of all ages. And the secret to this has been the readiness of St Mary's to work in partnership with other community groups. This was the first year that we sought funding of any kind. We obtained a grant from Fourth Environment Link to employ someone part-time to create a website and to work with volunteers to publicise the events. We got sponsorship from a local environmental consultancy to enable the Glasgow Science Centre to come with exhibits for children during the Bank Holiday Monday. And we were awarded a grant from our local wind farm trust to pay for an eco-storyteller, the Reverend Russell McClarty, to work with the team in the churches on an event we called the Eco Journey. We invited primary 4 pupils from all the schools to come to St Mary's, a class at a time, to listen to positive environmental stories from around the world and to respond with simple craft activities. Well, we're only just starting to plan EcoFest 26, but we've been keeping up the momentum from last May and seeking out members of the community who might be able to join our steering group by hosting a repair cafe and an eco cafe with an opportunity for conversation on the first Tuesday of every month. I'd like to emphasise, though, that we're still a very small team and we're still working on a shoestring. But now we're at the centre of a large network of local and national partners and supporters who are very ready to contribute in many different ways. Thank you.
The issues around about financial support, I heard Alan's comment about the VAT issue and how that's been translated into a different programme within the UK government. I'll take that away and explore what the consequential funding arrangements are. I think there's obviously a number of different areas where the government makes available support through some of the different funding streams that go into some of the restoration programmes and rehabilitation programmes. There's obviously also substantial public expenditure that is deployed to support adaptation of property, so there's no reason why that can't be extended to churches, or it can't be inclusive of churches, in relation to being equipped for net zero arrangements, whether that's in, Alan talked about the care system, which is been a really successful part of our programme, but heavily oversubscribed. So there will be different ways of accessing funding programmes that will be relevant to churches as part of the overall agenda on net zero. But I'll take away the subsequent VAT issue and look at all that's involved there.
The Provincial Net Zero team supports Scottish Episcopal churches as part of our shared mission to care for God's creation and pursue climate justice. We do this by helping churches develop practical project plans, signposting them towards reliable resources, and pointing them to funding that enables real and lasting change. At the heart of this work is a growing movement for transformation across the Scottish Episcopal Church. We are sharing our learning with other faith groups, charities and local communities, recognising that climate justice is a collective calling. We celebrate both the ambitious retrofit projects and the small steps towards sustainability already taking place in our congregations. By telling these stories, we empower and inspire others to join us on this journey towards a fairer, more sustainable future.